Hi, my name is Panav Mhatre, and I'm the host of Spot Robotics Podcast. Welcome. Today I'm joined with my guest, Mr. LP Peterson, discussing software and spatial computing. This was a super informational episode, and she brought some amazing views. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast where you can get insights to technology in the modern world and get a new perspective and advice on succeeding in these fields. If you enjoyed the podcast, follow us on wherever you get your podcast, and if you'd like to support us even more, give us a review. Thank you and enjoy. Okay. So my first question is that you worked at Apple 4 times, and my first question was, what is one thing you liked about working at Apple?
I think each time I've worked at Apple, it's been really about the people and the processes and the decision making. It aligns with my personal values and also how I like to work. So that's been a big driving factor in my applications each time. Yeah, their interview process is also a little bit crazy. So I've been lucky to pass it quite a few times. And yeah, I think they see that as well when I interview that we're pretty well aligned. And so that's led to me coming back.
I guess one follow-up question, I guess a little off script, but could you expand on like some of the values that align? Is that something you could do, or is that not allowed?
Yeah, I think technology being human centered and trying to make a device that fits a lifestyle or a worldview that brings humanity forward, and does it in an ethical and private way and leaves the consumer in control of their data is something that I really appreciate. And behind the scenes, I see all of those things working well, and it's not just a front, which I think is kind of unique in the technology space. So I really like working here.
That's really cool. I guess for the next question was, I know you work in the AR VR space, and my question was, what is something you're looking at right now, and what is something you think that like what do you think the future of the industry is going to be like?
That's a tough question to answer now. It's kind of nascent, right? And we've seen a lot of things fail in the past. I think of Google Glass and Google Cardboard and like HoloLens from
Mhm.
Microsoft, and how none of these really captured what people wanted from that type of device. So I think going forward, like the challenge is going to be how does a consumer want to use this technology? What are the ways in which it benefits us to use that type of experience? Um, and if you can crack that, I think you'll be successful, but remains to be seen. It's a very interesting space right now.
Mhm. So, for someone working in the tech space, what is the number one thing that motivates you to keep on, I guess, pursuing what you're doing, like keep on growing at what you're doing?
Mostly money. Is that okay to say?
That's definitely okay to
Yeah, I
say. I
think
mean,
I think honestly that's why people are kind of drawn to the tech industry is
mm,
like if you're doing the same type of work but the salaries are so much higher, that's pretty cool. But I think what keeps me staying here is just that I'm genuinely interested in technology. From the time I was small and was like fixing things and trying to figure out how they worked and I love puzzles. It's just like working on a big puzzle every day. And I think it's pretty cool to be paid for that.
that's I guess I mean a lot of people agree with that because that's the tech industry. Um, so now away from Apple, I guess, could you tell us a little bit more about your experience? I'm not sure if I'm saying this correctly, but Zappa, I guess, and like
Yeah,
being as an advisory board member, like what was the experience and some of the challenges you faced?
yeah, Zappa's a really interesting product. It's basically an app where you can engage in personal learning and development according to your interests, and then a lot of the modules and advice there has been curated from experts in their fields. You could think about finance and you want to like learn about how to plan for retirement, it's there. If you want to think about like, oh, I'm feeling really burnt out, what are like some of the things I can do to be more mindful or improve my headspace? That's also there. So it's just personal development, but instead of like scrolling through your TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn feed and like trying to figure out like what advice is good for me today, you actually have a bona fide expert and like curated modules for that. And then they wrapped it in kind of like a cute game like experience. So working on the advisory board honestly was not that intense. They had us review the modules, read them, tell us how we felt about them, which I did, and then they also had like a beta for their app. I can't participate in that due to my work, but that was something that the advisory board also participated in.
I guess one follow up would be, I guess could you elaborate a little bit more how you got on the advisory board? Like how was that first? Like how'd you get on there? Like
Yeah, I think it was just through connections. They wanted people that were like of my age group and like my industry level, and were just kind of interested in people like that. So through some like networking, that happened.
sounds cool. I guess so. My next question was, what made you work in the field of STEM and pursue, I guess, a degree in STEM?
Yeah, I had originally set my sights kind of on the medical industry, but quickly realized I was terrible at chemistry. So tech was something that had always been interesting to me. And I realized that there was still a lot of space to grow in the tech industry and keep learning. So um, way back when I was like fixing computers in the university technology lab. It was basically like a genius bar for people that were struggling on campus. So I saw like Linux machines and Apple machines and PCs, and just got started fixing them. And that kind of led me to pursue engineering and then specifically tech later on. Um, but yeah, I think just in general, solving problems and making things work more efficiently is something that has been a theme in my life, and yeah, led me to this industry.
So my question with you to you was that if I'm correct, you mastered in industrial engineering, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess I mean currently what you're working at, what made you I guess go from industrial engineering to like hardcore technology and like software?
Industrial engineering is kind of a weird major. Most people don't know anything about it. They confuse it with industrial design, which is completely separate. That's like a fine arts
Mhm.
major. I share it with Tim Cook, which is very interesting. um, he got as his degree in industrial engineering from the start as well, and it's really about like having a supply chain mindset with an engineering background. So it's how do things move through their processes, and how do you engineer those processes to be efficient, with like a whole side order of like math and chemistry and like software engineering and those kinds of things, so you can communicate with people who work on those projects as their like day to day.
So based on your experience, I know you've worked at companies smaller than Apple, and my question was to you is when you're working at Apple right now, what is like one of the differences between working at a large company like Apple and like I guess a smaller company like Cisco or startup companies, I guess, like not at that large scale. Is there any difference or anything?
Yeah, there's a lot of differences, I think. One of them is just like the speed and scale in which you can move on larger projects. Um, Larger companies like Cisco and Apple can move more quickly, but they can also move more slowly because there's more people in the way that like kind of have to make decisions about things. So once a decision is made, you can move really quickly, but the time leading up to that decision might feel really slow. Another thing that the kind of speed relies on is the consumer product cycle or industry product cycle. Like when I was working at Cisco, for example, you had to support a product for 10 years, 10-year life cycle. So it would be like 10 years but before like you start on a project and then you end a project. It works a little bit more like maybe the defense industry. Um, when you're in consumer product industry, then things are like on an annual basis or maybe every 2 years basis. So that's one big difference. And then in smaller companies that make fast decisions, it's just like they don't have as much leadership training or like as much experience. It's like an engineer may have started a company and like they don't necessarily have the people skills or like the organizational mindset to try and make their teams do what they want. So there can be like this underlying air of frustration almost in smaller companies, between like the owner and the teams working for them. So that's just one thing that can come up in smaller companies. But some people really love the fact that like you can have influence over the founder and like make decisions really quickly and act towards them.
So my next question was related to your early career experiences, like right out of college or like during college with Coca-Cola and B and aerospace. I guess what are the biggest things you learned like during your early experience that you carry on to this day when you're working at Apple?
Mostly that I didn't want to be in a factory. Um, yeah, I had a lot of internships and career experiences that were like in plastics or bottling or like even aerospace, and you're just like, things are dirty, there's no air conditioning, like it's just a bad environment. Um, so I think like those internships kind of taught me more about like that the environment matters to me and like I do want to be in maybe an air conditioned office or like at least not outside, those kinds of things or in the Arizona heat with in a factory with no AC. Yeah, that was a lot of fun for 2 summers. Um, yeah, I think those are like very early on experiences. And then for aerospace, it was just like things moved so slowly. It was like everything had so much regulation, dealing with the FAA, like it was just so slow. And I was like, I need something faster than that.
I guess I don't know if you can talk, but could you talk a little bit more specifically since about like the stuff you did at Coca Cola or like what your overall job was? Because I was interested in
Yeah.
like factory stuff.
Yeah, I mean, factory is really cool. It's kind of
Okay.
like being on how it's made every day, um, which has a lot of pros. What they wanted me to do is basically just like sit there and evaluate the whole like factory operations and then like give a presentation at the end of 3 months is like, you should fix this and fix that and fix that. And then maybe they took my suggestions or maybe they didn't. Um, one of the things that I noticed about Coca-Cola in particular is I was in their bottling plant, and Coca-Cola bottling was actually separate from the brand up until right around the time that I started working for them, like 2010. And it's still separate in some places. So that was like a big learn. It was like, okay, bottling is like Coca-Cola Enterprises, and then like Coca-Cola, the brand that everybody loves, is like its own company. So that was interesting. And then the other interesting takeaway was that the materials involved in like making soda are so cheap, like corn syrup, water, a bottle, that they actually didn't have any tracking for like what went on the line versus what came off the line. They only tracked like what they made and what they stored in their warehouse. So like everything up until that point, if somebody I don't know, if half the bottles disappeared off a truck or whatever, like they wouldn't even know. So that was what my major like recommendation to the factory was like, hey, maybe you should receive things in a little more, strategic way. That way you know how much waste you're producing as well. From a monetary perspective, maybe that number was small, but like coming in as a younger person, I was like, the environmental impact, what are you guys talking about? Yeah, and so that's kind of what I learned.
Do you know if they implemented that or is that still a mystery?
I haven't gone back to that factory, and it may be totally different at other factories because they seem very independently managed. Um, so yeah, no say.
So I want to ask about the aerospace part because aerospace is really interesting. I want to know since you moved from like a Coca Cola factory to aerospace, like what were the things you did at aerospace and like how was it like was it completely different? Was it a completely different atmosphere?
Yeah, in aerospace, I actually work more on like the QA side. So it was like we were in a warehouse and they had parts, and then like before the parts were like sold and shipped, they would like measure them in all sorts of specific ways to make sure that they met the spec and that the customer would be happy with them. Um, so that's what happened. It wasn't very interesting. What I learned about the aerospace industry is that, like, yeah, there's a lot of highly specific rules and regulations. Part expiration is something that matters a lot in that type of world. So it's like we've had these bearings that, this air airplane manufacturer wants to purchase from us. How long have they been sitting on our shelf? Do they still meet the spec? How do we measure them, etc.? And that's kind of how that worked. Um, none of all of it was paperwork. So much paperwork, not a lot of design or like creative thinking that went into that particular internship. A little bit of optimization around like how we store things or how we access the part spec sheets and those kinds of things. Nothing that was super super. I wish I could tell you more interesting things, but really I was
Yeah.
like, oh, it would be more efficient if we could like access this part in a, you know file system that's like on the cloud instead of like having to go get the book and make a copy and then go. like measure your part. So yeah, very, very like basic digitization projects and stuff like that.
So I'm seeing that you went again. You went from after Apple, from like the technician. You went back to another another water bottle company. What made you? Is that something you like wanted to work again at a water bottle company, or what was? I'm just curious because.
Okay, yeah. So Niagara bottling has a little bit special place in my heart because it was like so cool to see they took plastic resin and like filtered water, reverse osmosis water, and then like at the end of the line you had like a full and labeled like water bottle. So it was more than just bottling, it was like also injection molding, and that part intrigued me a lot. And you can see further on in my like experience, there's a little bit more of that like injection molding and parts manufacturing.
Could you expand a little bit more about what injection molding is and everything like that? So like I don't know. I actually
What
don't
is
know.
injection molding? Yeah, injection molding is like the process by which like plastic pellets become like a shape. So that could be like probably whatever's sitting on your desk right now, whether it's like an AirPods case or
Mhm.
like the even the things that surround the metal. Um, and like the things that you plug into the wall, those are usually injection molded. Parts for like laptops can be injection molded. Um, yeah, it's basically the process by which plastic resin turns into a useful part, and that requires a lot of heat and pressure and cooling. So you like have a big block of metal that's been like cut out in the specific shape that you want the plastic to take, and then it's a lot like baking a cake. You just kind of like extrude it, and it becomes the part that you want.
That's cool. So I want to go like towards like advice. So I want to ask like, what would your advice be to I guess the next generation of people coming like in high school and college? Like, what would you say would be something that they should do to I guess be in your industry or to just be in technology in general?
I think that the most fun thing to realize is that the people that are doing these things now are not that different than you. And it's really just about tailoring your experiences to make you a great candidate for whatever role you want to have in the future. And don't be afraid to try something, because when you try something and you find out what you don't love, it's a lot easier to kind of pinpoint what your next role is. I think a lot of people kind of sit on the couch or maybe talking to their parents and feel like, oh, what do I wish I could be? And like, it's an iterative process. It's not something that can just happen overnight. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, I found my life purpose. It just doesn't happen that way. So with each role that you take, you're going to take the good and take the bad and then find your next role. And then you become like a heat-seeking missile towards that purpose. Yeah.
I definitely feel you. So I guess one thing was for me was that I was doing research and I was doing research for LLMs, and then I was interested in doing research for like biomed, and like because a bunch of my friends had done it, and I did it once and I did not like it because there's just so much like a bunch of the data processing is like you have to overlap patient data on top of each other
Hmm.
for like a lot of different things, and it's a complete like it's not you're not focusing more on I guess the part of the AI, you're focusing more on like processing data, and that was something that was really painful. But so my next question, yeah, my next question was it was about Sidebar. So could you tell us a little bit more about Sidebar and what it is? And I guess you were saying like you were a founding member. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, founding member just means I
Yeah.
reached out to them pretty early on in the process and became like a customer basically for them, an early customer. Um, they basically stick you with a cohort of people. It's almost like school. Like you have grade levels in
Yeah.
school and you're like, okay, here's all the second graders and they're going to learn their ABCs and how to, read paragraphs. Um, Maybe that's a little too not advanced for second grade, but you get my point.
Yeah.
So what Sidebar does is they kind of put you in a class of people because you don't always have access to people that are like you when you're in your profession. It's like I'm doing this role and somebody else is doing another role. So they kind of take people that are at a similar place in their career, maybe a little above, maybe a little bit below, and like put you guys in a room and have some structured conversation about your goals and um, just like how to navigate like getting promoted or changing your job or dealing with something at family or financial. And so they're all kind of similar people, but also different. And that helps progress forward as a group.
Has there been anything that's impacted you for I guess like that's impacted you for as being like I guess it's like at a management position, like anything that's impacted you from that?
Yeah, I think it's been good to like understand how people face their problems that are like it's a similar problem to mine maybe, but like their approach is really different. And the advice that we give each other has been valuable. It's like I'm dealing with a person that has these characteristics, and then somebody would be like, "Oh yeah, I knew somebody like that, and here's what we did, and here's what worked and what didn't." Um, and that can be like very enlightening, and then also increases your self-awareness.
So I guess I want to talk a little about Cisco since Cisco has always been something interesting for me.
I mean, they
So I want
invented the
to,
internet. What's not interesting
yeah,
about Cisco?
yeah. There's so many things interesting about it. I guess now, I guess even now, I guess a little bit. But I guess could you talk about what you did back when you were in Cisco?
Yeah, it was a new product introduction. So instead of like the software side where I'm more focused now, it was hardware specific, and it was like there's actually a phone sitting on the desk right now that was like one of my first projects. But the Cisco phones that you like see in certain
Mhm.
like movies or TV shows, that was one of the products that I worked on. There's also like a scene in one of the first what am I they're like the Transformers movies from
Yeah,
Disney. So like the live action Transformers movies. And there's like that scene where like, I don't know, the boss good guy is like on this giant video screen. He's like talking to everybody. That was another one of Cisco's products called telepresence. So I think it was cool to like work on products that I could kind of see in real life.
mhm.
And most of my job was like making sure that they got all the plans and all of the parts, and that we had like a list of what needed to be made and what needed to be assembled, and then made sure that the factory understood those instructions.
That's really cool. So my dad works in networking, and we have like a bunch of those phones like lying around. That's really cool to know someone who actually worked on these phones. Because I've seen like we have like
I might know your
20, I
dad, who
think.
knows?
I don't know, because he's like he went to the highest level in Cisco, like I guess certification. So he's like has a bunch of Cisco products over here.
Oh, got it. Yeah, like CCNA or
Yeah, yeah,
CCIE.
yeah, CCIE. That
Oh,
was
very
that was
cool.
actually really cool. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so my I guess could we talk about old Apple experience, or is that not a thing? Like talking about the
I would
experience
like
like
to
that.
say that none of
Yeah,
these views at all, they represent my personal views and are not
yeah,
at
yeah,
all affiliated, like that whole
yeah,
spiel
yeah,
is absolutely true. But yeah, shoot, I'll let you know if it's not a good question.
yeah. I guess could we talk about the technician part? Like anything
Yeah,
like
Genius
what you do?
Genius Bar 10 years ago is pretty safe for sure. So yeah, people would come in angry with their computers
Mhm.
or iPhones or anything like that. I'd try and fix them up and send them on their way. So it's the
Okay,
job. Any
I
specific
guess
question
now
there?
to no, I mean it's a technician. So I guess was there anything interesting that happened to you in that time that really impacted
I
you
got like
to work at Apple again?
so many stories. I mean, it's a customer service job, so like you
Yeah,
always have
it's
your
like
like
there's got to be some interesting ones.
crazy experiences. One was when like Drake came into our store and we're like, "Oh my God, it's Drake." But I
Really?
think he was just like buying some beats and because he like forgot his or something, and then he
Mhm.
left with his entourage. Um, and then yeah, there were like some customers had pretty interesting experiences, but my favorite one was like a customer came in with a laptop that had been liquid damaged, and we like sent it off to see if it could be fully reconstructed, and along the way FedEx ran it over with a forklift, so
Wow.
the customer wasn't going to repair it because it was like pretty destroyed before. And then it got absolutely destroyed by FedEx, and then when they came back into the store we were like, oh, your shipping insurance kicks in at this point, so we got to give them like a new laptop because the package had been destroyed, even though it was basically a paperweight when we sent it off.
Wow, I've
So,
actually never heard of that for FedEx.
yeah, I mean, it was more of a FedEx story than an Apple story, but
Yeah.
it was still a pretty cool experience for the customer.
So I guess now it's to the part where I think like for the software part where you worked at for like software like this in the tool program. Is there
Mhm.
could I ask what you did, or is that like not something I could do?
Tooling was actually parts manufacturing.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
that's what.
Yes, so I know
Well,
there's like tooling, like web
yeah,
tools, and then
yeah,
just you're probably more familiar with that. But no, this
yeah.
was like literally going to the factory, and it was injection molding, and it was silicone molding, and metal stamping, and like very physical tools. Yeah.
Is there a factory in San Francisco? Because I didn't see it when I went to San Francisco ever.
No, these were mostly overseas manufacturers.
Overseas. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
that's what I,
There are a few plastics manufacturing companies in the Bay Area. I think they're mostly East Bay. I think like Plasticon is one. So if you're super interested in injection molding, you might be able to figure out
I
a
mean,
tour over there.
I've seen injection molding a little bit in the
Yeah.
factories. I think I saw it at the Jelly Bean factory in
Okay.
California. Because I
Maybe.
came to California for WWDC 24, so I'd
Oh,
seen
nice.
it. So that was
But
pretty
yeah,
cool.
there's not much in California. Like
Yeah,
it's a pretty, you need a lot of
I visited
space. The
California
machines are
after
really
almost
heavy.
I visited California after almost a decade because I hadn't gone when I was until like I went when I was 7, and then I hadn't gone to California ever since because I'd go to everywhere but like the West Coast. I guess my next question would be related to like the software part.
Mhm.
Could you talk about what you did over there, or is that not possible?
Yeah, I mean, in general terms, it was
Yeah.
the diagnostics app that they use in the retail stores. We made new versions of that, um, decided what features went in and shipped them.
Okay. I guess about to wrap up, but I know you went to Cibros, if I'm saying that correctly. I want
Yeah,
to
Cerberus, yeah.
ask like what made you, I guess leave Apple, or like what made you go away from Apple and go to that.
Such a
I
good question. I
yeah,
think my
I also want to
parents
know.
had
It's like
that. I think my parents had the same question. Basically, it was the pandemic. You look at the years,
mhm,
and I also had a child. So, like in 2020, I like came back to Apple from maternity leave, and like it just didn't feel good. It was just like I was bored. The pandemic was like at its height.
mhm,
We weren't allowed to go into the office and talk to each other. It was all a very weird world, and everything had changed for me. So instead of trying to like find another role within Apple or like talk to my manager about what I
mhm,
could have done to like fix that feeling, I was just like, you know what? I need to get out. Um, and so I did. I went to a startup because I thought the experience would be really valuable. It totally was. I call it my MBA. um,
mhm,
like I was able
mhm,
to observe a software company at a much smaller scale. So I was involved with product marketing and I was involved with our customer success and I was involved with the engineering team and I was involved with compilers and like all of these things that at Apple are very different divisions and that all work together, but they're just not they're not like small enough for one person to grasp. I was able to do that at the smaller scale of Subros, and I think it was a really valuable
mhm.
experience for sure.
Yeah. Uh, I guess so. Then, what made you leave? I guess leave Subaru and come back to Apple. That like
I was
was there
interested
any?
in a really specific project, and that really specific project allowed me to come
Yeah.
back.
Okay.
So, yeah.
That's really cool. So I guess we can get to the last question. So my I usually end off all my interviews with this one question is when you look back at your journey to whoever you became and like whatever you're doing right now, is there anything that you look back in your experience or in your career and see that you could have done better or changed?
I think most of what I like to do is look forward, and see like what moves could I do today to change my trajectory towards something that I want to end up at. At this point, I don't really think that there's anything that I would
Mhm.
change. I've had a pretty exciting career. I've got to see like both hardware and software at really deep and specific levels that most people don't get to see. Um, yeah, I think like the one thing that people come back to is the only people that will remember in 25 years how hard you worked is your kids. It's like, did you spend enough time with your kids? So since having a kid, I've taken a little bit more different perspective on exactly what needs to be done to be a good mom and feel like I'm killing it in the mom department as well as the work department. So you might see some changes and priorities going forward. But right now, I'm pretty happy with how things are.
I had one follow up question. Which one do you prefer, software or hardware? It's,
Hardware is hard.
yeah, it's definitely really hard.
Yeah, I mean, It's just a different set of problems for sure. I love that you can solve software problems directly, and hardware
Mhm.
problems are always like one or two or three steps removed from you typically. It's like, oh, we have a problem with this part that we're seeing in the factory. Therefore, I got to go talk to the factory and see if they're the problem, or talk to the designer and see if they're the problem. And then if it's the designer's problem, then I got to have the designer change the plans and then send them to the factory. And then 6 weeks later, we're going to see the result.
Yeah.
So like, it's really gratifying in software to be like, oh, we changed that overnight and it's better now. So I prefer software, but I have the utmost and deepest respect for hardware. And there is still some things it's like, oh, I remember that. That was fun. So that I won't get anymore.
Okay, I guess I usually ask everyone